screen. Thank you, Mickey, for making all this possible. Up to the top. All right, so back with the story of the Zohar and Kabbalah and all of that stuff. Defenders of the Zohar and ramifications of non-belief in its authenticity. So we all remember last week, no doubt, and we learnt the piece of juicy gossip about the origins of the Zohar, and we read all sorts of critiques, including Rabbi Jacob Emden and the Esnocha bit. Okay, if it's a work by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we wouldn't expect to find Spanish words and a whole lot of other things. So we're going to start off with the opposition. The opposition says that, of course, the Zohar was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and we daren't believe anything else. So, Shmuley, to celebrate your return to the Holy Land, would you like to read?
The authenticity of the Zohar was, of course, never doubted by generations of Kabbalists, especially those from the 16th century onwards, who were influenced by the Kabbalah of Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari HaKadosh.
Okay, so you've got the Zohar and its Kabbalah. Zohar was the most sophisticated and comprehensive work of Kabbalah in its time, the 13th century. Bits and pieces are on view in earlier books, Sefer HaYetzirah, Sefer HaBahir, the Hechalot, and they go back a long time. But nothing was as comprehensive or as interesting as the Zohar, which, as we'll see in a couple of weeks, consists of quite a few different books. The next signpost in the development of the Zohar is the Ari HaKadosh, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ashkenazi. The Ari and the Lurianic Kabbalah takes the Zohar and adds a lot more to it. I'm not going to say too much because we are going to spend a little time looking at this, but Lurianic Kabbalah is a very sophisticated form of the Kabbalah in the Zohar, whereas the Kabbalah in the Zohar is basically based upon the 10 Sfirot and the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Lurianic Kabbalah has a theory of cosmogony, how the world came into existence, and also, of course, has the doctrine of Tzimtzum, how God limits himself and then sends back a ray of light, and this ray of light passes down through the 10 Sefirot. Certain stage, the light is too powerful for the kelim, for the Sefirot, and there's a shattering of the vessels, Shvirat HaKelim. And the shattering of the vessels means the light is scattered all over. And the job of human beings is to do a tikkun, to gather these bits of light and to restore the harmony between the Sfirot. But there are groups of Sfirot in the Lurianic Kabbalah that don't appear in the Zohar. There is the large face and the small face. Zeir Anpin, we'll talk about that a little later today. So you've got really two very important literary works, the Zohar, 13th century, the Lurianic Kabbalah. The Ari himself didn't write anything, but his students, known as the Lion's Cubs, Gurei Ha'ari, they wrote, in particular, Rabbi Chaim Vital. And it is from the works that were written about the Ari's Torah that we know about the Kabbalah of the Ari. Okay, so, and the Ari HaKadosh, his Kabbalah really formed the rest of the Kabbalistic study and work since his time. Okay, so anyhow, that's the point there. In fact, Shmuley, can you read on, please? The publisher.
The publisher of the first printed edition of Sefer Yuchasin HaShalom was highly dubious regarding the attribution of the story of Rav Moshe de Leon's authorship of the Zohar to Rav Yitzchok of Akko, and it was omitted from subsequent copies of the book until the original version was restored in the 1857 edition.
Okay, anybody remember the name of the mathematical genius who produced the 1857 edition?
Zakuta.
Herschel Filipovsky. It was last week, Shmuley, and you weren't there. Interesting guy. You may remember him. Came over to England from Lithuania. He corrected the times. Anglo Jewry was bringing Shabbat in at the wrong time, and they weren't keeping the Brit on the 8th day. The Sephardim had got it wrong, Bevis Marks. So Herschel Filipovsky, well, he was an actuary, and anyhow, that was all last week. So the story of the authorship of Rabbi Moses de Leon was in fact restored to the original Sefer Yuchasin HaShalem, whose author was indeed Rabbi Abraham Zakuto, okay, after whom the Zagut crater on the moon is named, okay, and now we know the story was part of the Sefer Yuchasin HaShalem. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who would like to read next amongst those very familiar with the English? Who do we have here? Okay, Ian, would you like to have a crack?
Of course you're going to pick on me. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, Ramchal, 1707-1746, wrote a tract defending the Zohar entitled Choker U'Mekubal in reaction to the deep distress he experienced when he read Ari Nochem.
Ari Nohem, The Lion Roars in Venice. Okay, who wrote the exactly? Rabbi Moses de Modena, the Ari Nohem. Good. Okay. This work, however, back to you, Ian.
Keren Chemed 2, pages 51. This work, however, is mainly concerned to justify the view that the Torah has an inner meaning which the Kabbalah alone is capable of revealing, rather than to defend the Zohar against the specific charges laid against the Zohar by Rav de Modena, including its false attribution to Rashbi.
Okay, all this is stuff we've done before, but that story about Rabbi Moses de Leon, 1240 or so, writing the Zohar, not Rashbi at all of this, of course, really made the Ramchal very unhappy. But the book he wrote, which is Choker U'Mekubal, saying that the Choker is okay, but the Mekubal is much better, all right, really doesn't tackle the accusations against the Zohar. The Chida. You might as well finish this off, Ian. The Chida.
Rav Chaim of David Azulai, lived 1724-1806, opposed the attribution of the Zohar's authorship to Rav de Leon and cites a legend concerning its discovery, which was called Shem Hagdolim Erech Zohar.
Rabbi Azulai, the Chida, wrote a numerous amount of books, something like 80 books. He was extremely prolific, Israel and then Italy. And Shem Hagdolim tells us about rabbis and their books. It's an amazing work. By the way, what is the name Azulai? Which type of Jew was he? Answer? A Kohen. And why is Azulai a Kohen?
Isha Zona something,
Exactly. Isha Zona v'chalala lo yikachu. That's why Azulais are Kohanim. Okay? So there you are. That's just for free. Now, what does the Chida, who was a Kabbalist as well, what does he say? You know, by the time you get to the 18th century, there are many, many, many Kabbalists. It's not unusual at all. Ad shikra Hashem lifnei melech echad mimalchei Mizrach. So this is almost like a Hasidic or Chabad or Art Scroll story. It happened that a king in the east, he hired a contractor to do a dig somewhere because he wanted to discover a treasure. Okay, wanted to make some money. In Sasham Aron Echad, and they discovered a mysterious box. Ubo Sefer Zohar. And what was in the box? The Zohar. The Shalach Chachmei Edom. Who are the Chachmei Edom? Christians, the Catholic Church. So this king is an Easterner, doesn't know much about this funny book, sends it to the Catholic Church. And they don't understand either. Shalach Achar Yudim. It's a bit like the Kuzari. Try the Muslims, try the Christians. Well, let's try the Jews. This is a book that was written by a wise man. It's too deep even for us. Amar lei, you're a single Jew, you're a smart people. How can a single one can understand the book? Arulo yesh b'medinat Tolitila. In Spain, in Toledo, there could be people who would understand. The sages of Toledo understood. A lot of Kabbalists there. They sent the king lots of gifts. All of this is again a medieval story. The Zohar was kept hidden in this box for a long, long time. Rashbi wrote it in the era of the Tanaim. It took to the 13th century to get out of the box. It came out of the cupboard, out of the Aron. That's where the Zohar came from, and it entered the Jewish world in the 13th century. So all sorts of stories. I could have given you 7 pages of different stories as to, they all accounting for the fact that the Zohar doesn't appear until the 13th century. So let's go to Hungary. Who'd like to read? So I don't know. Alan Liebler, would you like to read?
If my voice can, if you can hear me, because I haven't been well the last few days. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can anybody not hear Alan?
Here.
Okay.
Alan, you're on.
Rabbi Moses Kunitz, 1774 to 1837, Hungarian rabbi, composed a work entitled Ben Yochai, 1815, in which he attempted to align Rashbi's authorships of the Zohar with passages in the Talmud in which Rashbi figures.
Okay, so Rabbi Kunitz, a Hungarian rabbi, decides he's going to justify Rashbi's authorship, comparing Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or Rabbi Shimon Stam in the Gemara to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's the hero of the Zohar. He appears all over all the time. So he does this comparison now just to prove that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that we know from the Talmud, is the author of the Zohar. One more line.
Okay. Rabbi Kunitz disposed of any passages which contradicted his theory by attributing them to the period prior to his sojourn in the cave with his son Elazar, during which the Talmud simply refers to him as Stam Rav Shimon.
Now, he has a very interesting theory. Now, you know about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the cave. 12 years, and then another 12 years, 24 years total. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is fleeing from the Romans, and he and his son Elazar hide in a cave. Now, 24 years out of the general run of life is a good time to become a highly adept mystic, okay? Because there's not much you're going to do in the cave. But not to put this down, okay? This is where Rabbi Shimon Stam becomes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, okay? I think the next person down was let's have a look. Going up. I'm going to play with my what's it now? Thank you, Alan.
Continue.
No, I'll give your voice a rest, but that was perfectly audible.
Okay.
Jeff, would you like to take it up,
Okay.
please?
Okay. After the sojourn in the cave, he is recognized as a master of mysticism. His rulings are accepted as authoritative, and he is given his full name, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. In this context, too, Rav Kunitz disposed of inconvenient passages in an ingenious manner. It is generally agreed that the work is highly tendentious and also deliberately distorts the arguments.
Tendentious. I know this may be a
Tendentious.
bit tendentious, but who would like to define the word tendentious?
Suspect, really.
Subject to suspect.
No, it's not
Suspect.
really suspect. It's when you're pushing a point and it doesn't matter what the evidence is. Is that correct, Bernard Wolfson? You're tendentious. You're forcing the argument no matter what the facts are.
Beyond the evidence.
Beyond the evidence. There we are. The word of an
Okay.
eminent jurist. Okay. So
Highly tendentious.
thank you, Jeff. Yeah.
And
Good.
and also
And-
deliberately distorts the arguments advanced by Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his Mitpachat
Mitpachat
Svarim
Svarim.
against Rabbi Rashbi's authorship. Rabbi Shlomo Yehuda Rappaport, the
Known as
Shiur, wrote
Shiur. Okay.
Shiur.
Shlomo Yehuda Rappaport wrote.
He wrote Nachalat Yehuda in Lemberg,
It was
1815,
published in
which he-
Lemberg in 1815.
and he totally demolished Rav Kunitz's points one by one and demonstrated conclusively that Rav Emden's critiques were all justified with no exceptions. Okay, the Lithuanian Kabbalist and follower of the Gra, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Havel, wrote an entire book, Magen Vezina.
Sina.
Vema?
Magen
Ve-
Vetsina.
Which
Okay,
also
let's try your Hebrew. Magen is what?
a shield,
Yeah, shield. What is Sina?
Is modesty.
modesty, keep it
No,
private.
that's Sadi Nun Ayin. This is Sadi Nun Hey.
At Sinai, it's cold, no? Cold
What?
stuff.
Yo?
Nun he. To feed
weather.
somebody. Lazun.
No,
Sina,
Sadi Nun Hey.
Sina,
Sadi nun he.
Modesty.
It's not
No,
dryness
It's not
either.
modesty.
Not modesty. Not Sadi Nun Ayin.
Sadi nun he.
It's a weapon.
Can
Oh,
I
what is
just
it?
remind you of a prayer you say every day, most of you?
Yeah.
Yoshev b'seter
You say
elyon,
earlier.
b'tzel
Yeah, but
Shaddai
that's
yitlonan. What's the verse I'm looking for? Be'evrato yasech lach, b'tachat knafav techese, tzina v'tzochei ra'amito. Is that not correct?
Mhm.
It is correct. So you
Yeah.
say that Yoshev Seter Elyon very often. How did you
Yeah.
understand that pasuk from Tehillim? You didn't. Okay, so let me just inform you. Be'evrato yasech lach. Evra is a wing. It's a wing. It's a protective wing. You're under the wings of God. Yasech is from schach. So God's wing or pinion protects you. The tachal kenafav, and under his wings, techese, you'll find machase, refuge. Sina, a shield. The sochera is a hapax legomenon. Amito, in his truth. Sina actually is a type of shield. Magen protects the chest, was usually made of a metal. Then there was a material type of shield that covered the whole body, and that's the Sina. Okay,
Oh,
so there we are. It occurs in elsewhere in Tehillim. Hechazak magen v'tzina v'koma be'ezrati. Okay, put up a shield to protect me. Anyhow, that's the title of the book. Rabbi Yitzchak Chaver was a student of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Shklov. Menachem Mendel of Shklov was a direct pupil of the Gaon of Vilna. And he, in fact, came to Israel, wrote Pat HaShulchan, and started that whole movement of the Talmidim of the Gaon here in Eretz Israel, who are actually the founders of the Nusach Ashkenaz in Israel. So the original Nusach Ashkenaz in Israel came in the 18th century with the followers of the Gra. That's the Prushim, and that basically is the Nusach they still follow in the Great Synagogue and in Yeshurun, and accounts for the fact that it is mainly Gaon oriented. For example, the Tehillim for festivals are not the Shir Shel Yom. There's different Tehillim for each and every festival. They don't say V'shamru. There's no Vayidaber Moshe, and the other quirks, and certainly no interceding with angels. Okay, no Machnise Rachamim or anything like that. So this is actually the original Nusach here. He was the rabbi of Tiktin, and he's called Peshlishi Lagra, the third mouth, because there's the Gra, Menachem Mendel of Shklov, and there's Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Chaver. So he was rabbi of Tiktin and Suvalk. Anybody heard of Suvalk? How's your Lithuanian geography? Suvalk. Look it up.
So about to have again.
Suvalk. What was that, Jean?
I heard already, but they were important rabbi in this.
There are important rabbis in Suvalk. Absolutely. Thank you as always for keeping us on our toes. He was a Talmid Chacham in Nigla and in Nistar. He wrote many books, Halakha, but also Kabbalah. And we've mentioned the fact that the Gaon of Vilna was a famous Kabbalist. In other words, he was an expert in Kabbalah. He just didn't want Kabbalah to be picked up by anyone and everyone off the street. So, Magen V'Tzina. Jeff, were you reading?
Okay, Magen V'Tzina. Now I know what
I
Tzina is.
wanted to say that Tzina means also cold. It's not here.
It's Tanen.
Tzina is also cold.
Correct. Tzinim upachim bidei adam, shomer nafsho yirachek mehem.
Okay.
But I think that's a later use. I think that in the Tanakh, that Tzina is a magen.
It's also
and I go back to my
it's also a woman's name. Tzina.
Tzina?
Yes, a woman's name.
What sort of women are you associating with, Ian?
My machatenister is called Tzina.
Okay. Well, you have to find out what the real name is. I'm not going to go to shielding from one's mother-in-law. Let's just move on quickly, which also attempted, Jeff.
Okay. Magen V'Tzina, which also attempted to refute all the attacks on the content of the Zohar and its composition by Rashbi, and in particular to warn against the Ari Nohem, which he viewed as the beginning of a slippery slope of skepticism, which threatened to delegitimize the entire traditional literary canon and grant victory to the maskilim of the period, who were already making serious inroads into European orthodoxy.
Okay, so now we have another way station. If you doubt the Kabbalah, who knows what you're going to doubt? We're in the era of Haskalah. Jews are coming out of the ghetto. Their rabbis are coming out of the ghetto. They're opening themselves up to the secular world. Some of them are becoming lax, the performance of the mitzvot, as they gain education and culture. And of course, the fight then becomes a fight against Haskalah. And the followers of the Gaon of Vilna may have been open to secular education, mathematics and philosophy. They certainly weren't open to Haskalah, which meant going, as it were, the whole hog with general culture. So what they did was they defended the Kabbalah, part of the tradition, which is a seamless entity. If you unpick one bit of it, you'll unpick the rest. I'll just give you a flavor. I'll read a bit from Magen V'Tzina. כי מי האיש אשר נגע יראת השם בלבבו ואהבת התורה וחסידיו וקדושי השם טהורי לב. There are all these famous pure rabbis who deal with the Kabbalah. ויתאפק ולא ירגיז ארץ ומנועה על ראותו, כי הובאו דבריו והבליו חירופיו וגידופיו בדפוס על ידי הרשעים הארורים שבדורנו זה. And our evil ones, the maskilim, they have brought the Ari Nohem to the forefront of Jewish literary endeavors. Upirsamu dvarav al pi tevel, and his words are now cited all over. Lechalkein b'Yaakov u'lehafitzei b'Yisrael. That, of course, comes from Sefer Bereshit, from Bereshit, where Yaakov says, Achalkein b'Yaakov v'afitzei b'Yisrael. Of whom does he say, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel? Shimon v'Levi, the violent sons, okay? Achalkein b'Yaakov v'afitzei b'Yisrael. Uveneinu ra'inu v'oznenu shamanu divrei na'atzot gudolot yotzim miburim rekim nurim mitorah u'michokma u'miyira. So people who have no wisdom, no Torah, and no understanding, they pick up the Ari Nohem, they say, Rashbi couldn't have written it. The whole thing is a fabrication. We don't need to believe in this Kabbalah at all. Hirgilu al shonam ze achibur hanishchat. And this despicable work, the corrupt work, is giving them ammunition to attack the tradition. V'dovrim atak al Hashem al mishicho. וגם במציאות השם השגחתו נפלו ברשת הספק, and even doubts as far as God's providence then begin to arise. ושחישו במוחלט. They are, I guess, Maimonideans, less believing that God looks after every single thing that happens in your life. Oy ledor shekach alta bi'amav. Woe to the generation. לכך אמרתי להראות אשר שקר עשה הרב החובל המלגלג הזה. That's Rabbi Aryeh Dimodena, who has become a Rav HaChovel, מלגלג, cynic, mocker. ופרסה גדולה פרץ בתורה הקדושה לידי המחברת הזאת. And this book is breaking down the walls of the Torah. ישתקע, may it be submerged somewhere, ובימחה שם הספר הזה מן העולם. And its name disappearing from the world. ולא יהיה עוד מכשול לבית ישראל. כי אתה רואה עינינו כמה הפרצה הטומאה הזאת בישראל שעל ידי החוברת הקטנה, העלובה הזאת. One little book, okay, can do so much damage. כמה נפשות אביונים נקיים נלכדו ברשת הכפירה. And because of it, all of those innocent souls have been lost to traditional orthodoxy. בכמה הספר הזה, כאילו ניתן מסיני. They walk around with the Ari Nohem under their arms on the way to Shul and back, as if this is the true Torah. ולא לבד ניתנה התורה והאמת וחס ושלום, שקר נחלו אבותינו. They say, our fathers were all befuddled by the legend of Rashbi, nothing in it at all. But I'm going to balance that with Rabbi Hillel Zeitlin. Now, Hillel Zeitlin, as we mentioned before, was a very interesting rabbi, Poland. And Ilui, of course, as they all were, Chabad. And then he entered the secular world. He became extremely well-educated, follower of Spinoza, Schopenhauer, Kant, Plato, languages. In fact, he may even have been a little shaky in his Frumkeit for a while, but then he came back. And he became known as the Warsaw Hasidic intellectual, an amazing man. Now, what he does is what we're eventually going to get to out of this whole story. And he says that Rabbi Hillel Zeitlin accepted many of the critiques of the Zohar and the Rashbi attribution. Marcel, would you like to take up the theme on page 40?
Give it a go. Rabbi Hillel Zeitlin, 1871 to 1942.
He was taken by the Germans from the Warsaw Ghetto, wearing his talit, his tefillin, and he had a copy of the Zohar. Of course, he was murdered shortly afterwards.
Shame. The Warsaw Hasidic intellectual accepted many of the critiques of the Zohar and the Rashbi attribution and had no problem in admitting that Rabbi de Lyon had a major role in formulating the Zoharic texts. In his view, however, the basic materials had come into existence over a period of many centuries, and Rav de Lyon had simply continued the process of expounding and expanding the ancient mystical doctrines in a similar literary style to the original documents. In this way, he accounts for many of the anachronisms in the Zohar, including the use of Spanish words.
You will remember the esnocha from last week, okay? Spanish word for synagogue. in the Zohar couldn't be Rashbi. But this, in fact, is supporting a view we have hinted at and articulated several times. There was Kabbalah, but Rabbi Moshe de Leon made a massive addition to it, took older sources, took sources from here and there, verteidigt und verbessert, okay, improved, added, and eventually produced a very impressive work, but it was his work, okay? And as the Khatam Sofer himself said, we were to search for the Rabbi Shim Rashbi core of the Zohar, we'd end up with a book with very few pages indeed. So I'm going to read the Hebrew. Rabbi Moshe de Leon Asaf kibetz v'liket bishkeda nifla'a. With wonderful stamina, Rabbi Moshe de Leon gathered, put together, juxtaposed, kol ha-kuntrasim ha'amurim, many of these older books and manuscripts and bits and pieces. V'olam hu lo haya rak ma'asef u'masader. He wasn't only an editor. Ki im ichnis b'kirbam gam et haruach shelo. He put his own spirit into it. Himshich hala et harayonot hakadoshim agdolim asher matzah. And he developed the mystical development of mystical doctrine. Darash otam kimin chomer. And he used the past like raw material. Hafach bahem v'hafach bahem u'matzah bahem pa'amim ta'amim rabim she'alu biyado lidrushim rabim. Much of the Zohar is in fact drashot on the Torah. So these drashot are expounded and connected by Rabbi Moshe de Leon. And that's why his language, the language of the Zohar, is like no other language. It's artificial. It's simply an attempt to put together what looks like an ancient Aramaic, but in fact is not. Sometimes he got it right, but sometimes his literary style gave him away. We find Spanish words. Clearly, Rashbi did not speak Spanish, okay, and all of these words come from a much later period. They come from de Leon. Now we're going to hit something very interesting. Yemen. What went on in Yemen in the early 20th century? And I'm talking about the Dor De'ah movement or the Dardaim. Anybody heard of them? Dardaim?
No.
No?
Oh, to see
Then
much.
I will let you know. The Dardaim, Dor De'ah, the generation of understanding, actually happened in Yemen in the early 20th century. So we'll get someone to read, and then I'll tell you a little more as we go. David Citron, you haven't read yet, so now it's your turn. Thank you. Line 26, in the early 20th century.
In the early 20th century, Rabbi Yichya Kafih, who was one of the most esteemed rabbis in Yemen, published a book in 1914 entitled Milchamot Hashem, in which he contended that not only was the Zohar not written by Rashbi, but it was composed by an accursed philosopher of the Neoplatonist or Gnostic persuasion and deceitfully implanted in Jewish tradition.
Well, there we are. Now, it's interesting thing, this is Yemen in the early 20th century. Now, Yemen had a tradition of following the Rambam. You all know that, right?
All right. Very
Like when the Rambam was alive,
rational.
the Kaddish was B'chayechon, Uv'yomechon, Uv'chayei, the Rabbeinu HaRambam, Uv'chayei Dechol Beit Israel. And they didn't have a Shulchan Aruch. They had the Mishneh Torah. They also had the Moren Nevuchim. Now, who is Rabbi Yichya Kafich's grandson? Rabbi Yosef Kapach, as we know him. Kapach, actually Kafich, who wrote the one of the editions of it. He translated Moren Nevuchim into Hebrew from the Arabic original. This is a Yemenite Rav, very famous Rabbi Yosef Kapach, and his grandfather was Rabbi Yichya Kafich. And what his briefly, we'll go into this soon a little more heavily, Gnosticism and Neoplatonism. Well, what are all they about? So again, as a very gentle introduction, if you're a Neoplatonist, you believe, and especially if you're a follower of Plotinus, 2nd century Greek philosopher living in Roman Egypt, Plotinus, you can look him up, that God is unknowable. God actually is unknowable, but there are three aspects of him that we do have some kind of understanding of. And there is the demiurge, there is a creative element, and then there is an understanding element, and then there is a soul. And if you want to get to God, you have to go basically to these three emanations of God. Gnosticism is also very similar. So what we have here, as opposed to the Aristotelian approach of Rambam, the unmoved mover, we have a way of getting to God that's not God, but is God at the same time. In other words, our understanding of God is gridded through different aspects of God, okay? And I mentioned this last week when I talked about the Christian Kabbalists and Pico de Mironadella, okay? And Petrarch and other Christian Kabbalists who said, well, this is the Trinity. 3 and 1, 1 and 3, same thing. Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovoro, talks about the Sfirot, like if you have, say, 10 green bottles, well, 10 glass bottles, and you have, they're all different colors, red, green, blue. You can pour the same water into each one. They'll all look as if they're different colors, but the water is still the same water. The idea is that you can get close to God somehow, have an effect, but not actually the real God, but some manifestation of God. So we'll learn about the 10 Sfirot and the high Sfirot that we cannot know about, the 7 lesser Sfirot that we can. And at the end of this chain, the bottom of the chain in the Sfirah of Malchut, somehow you, I, and each little Jew can have an effect on the arrangement of the Sfirot in heavens above. So everything we do is important. Again, contrast this with the Rambam, who says, well, very little the average garden Chaim Yankel does is very important. You have to be on a very high level to count. So it's easy to see why you might go for a mystical approach, okay, rather than an elitist approach. But the interesting thing is that Rabbi Yichya Kafich got very, very angry over what he regarded as the spread of the Kabbalah, the Zohar in Yemen, as against the study of the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, which is a rationalist work. He was also very upset by a lot of Kabbalistic practices that Yemenite Jews were carrying out. So he said, I'm going to mount an attack. And he talked, for example, about three aspects that he really did not like, okay? So, David, can you please continue? Right.
Yeah.
As had been the practice throughout the generations. Line 31.
As had been the practice throughout the generations among Yemenite Jewry. The Zohar's 10 Sfirot and the later Lurianic concept of the Zer Anpin.
The small, you may have come across that in the Ari Zmirot, Zer Anpin, like in B'nai Echala, Dixie Fin, if you sing that or not. I don't know that anybody does. These are the 3 Zmirot of the Ari. Shmuley, do you sing B'nai Echala? The Zeir Anpin. Now, did you know what the Zeir Anpin was?
I thought it was Hungarian, actually.
There we are. That's the refuge of most of us, okay? The Zeir Anpin is the 7 lesser Sfirot, the small face, If you combine that, sometimes it's called Kudsha Berichu, and then there's the Shekhinah. You combine the both, it gets wildly mystical. And there you are thinking it's Hungarian. What do you know? Okay. So these Sfirot Tiferet plus the 5 low Sfirot are glaring. David, can you continue with the
Are
glaring?
glaring examples of dualism or decatheism, like
What
10,
would,
is it? Yeah.
what would decatheism mean?
10 gods.
10,
And
and which are the 10 Sfirot, Bernard? If you believe in 10 Sfirot and there's God, you're a decatheist. Do you like that word? Did I invent it right?
Decatheism, yeah.
If you have a dualist, why not a decatheist? Okay?
Okay.
All right. And are nothing other.
And are nothing other than the practice of idolatry.
Now, when we were learning the Moreh Nevuchim, it was made very clear the Rambam says that anything that detracts from worship, unmediated worship of God, is Avodah Zarah. Okay? So all these great Kabbalists are all of their Avodah Zarah. Okay. And also Rav Kafich, David.
Rav Kapich also rejected the idea of transmigration of souls, Gilgun Samot, and the many Kabbalah-based superstitions that had been adopted in Yemen.
Okay. So Gilgun Shamot, souls can enter animals, but you know, it's actually part of what happens. I mean, somebody wanted to return a lost dog that they found on the street. And the dog led them to a place in Rishon LeZion where they discovered a ancient manuscript, and they were able to restore some book. The dog clearly had the soul of the Mechaber, of the Sefer in it. Now, again, it gives us a kind of a power to influence higher things by the very mundane, prosaic things we do. But of course, no mention of that anywhere in Jewish sources as such. And it all comes from the Kabbalah, and it's very much part of Eastern approaches. And anyhow, well, we're not going to go into the content yet too much, but Rabbi Kafich was very upset. And so Rabbi Kafich's followers became known
as the Dardaim,
which is Dor De'ah, generation of understanding. He wanted to clean out all of the Kabbalah, get rid of the Zohar, go back to the Rambam.
But there was also strong opposition to their views, especially on the part of rabbis outside Yemen. Cherems flew back and forth, and the schism in Yemenite Jewry only began to die out with its mass aliyah in 1949-1950 in Operation Magic Carpet.
Okay, Rabbi Yosef Kafich. Who is next? Don't know who we have with us. Thank you. David, Harvey, would you like to read?
He only died in 2000. Wow.
Are you there, Harvey? Because you are muted. Okay, let's try Victor. Are you there?
I am. Okay. Let's see. We're on, let's see, neutral. Okay, where are we? Line 2?
Line 40. The
Line 40. Okay,
Rabbi
sorry.
Yichya.
The grandson of Rabbi Yichya became the leader of the Baladi Yemenites in Israel, followers of the liturgy of the Dardaim.
And the Dardaim cut out all the mystical bits from the Nusach Tfilah, and Rabbi Yosef Kafich, who translated the Moreh Nevuchim from Arabic to Hebrew, is a grandson of Rabbi Yichya Kafich. But Rabbi Yosef Kapach adopted
a neutral approach to the Zohar and to Kabbalah, although his literary efforts were all invested in Maimonides and the Saadia Gaon, the rationalist philosophers.
Okay. So, you know, it's kind of, well, we're in Israel now. We can't be as extreme anti-Zohar and Kabbalah as we were in Yemen. So, well, but still, Rabbi Yosef Kafach is famous for his studies and works on Saadia Gaon and Rambam. No Zohar there. Read on, line 2, Rabbi Kafi's
Rab
successor.
Kafia's successor is Rabbi Dr. Ratzon Arusi. Oops,
Doctor,
excuse me.
okay, a university degree. Rabbi of Kiryat
Rabbi
Ono.
of Kiryat Ono, who wrote a tshuva to the effect that nowadays there is no need to oppose the Zohar, since the superstitions practiced in Yemen,
in its name,
in its name, are no longer observed, so there is no need to continue the controversy.
in other words, let's dampen all this down. Okay, let's see.
So it is
noteworthy that
it is noteworthy that Rav Avraham Yitzhak HaKohen Cook sent Rabbi Yifne Kifia a letter in which Kafi,
yeah,
like coffee, okay, a letter in which he explained
Okay.
that the entire Zohar is permeated with holiness, even if parts of it were added in later generations. Also, Rav Kafia charge of idolatry was unfounded, since almost all of our great rabbis in recent generations devoted themselves to the study of Zohar, and they were surely not idolaters.
Now, I think that sentence captures quite a bit of what's going on for us. We live in a Jewish Orthodox culture in which many of the great rabbis of the last few hundred years involved themselves in Kabbalah one way or the other. Some were like Hasidim or Chabad, who actually come up with it and try and teach it. Others, we know that the great Lithuanian Gaonim engaged in Kabbalah, but they didn't teach it by and large, and basically kept it in small, very esoteric, closed circles. But it is definitely there, and therefore it's, you have to be quite a rebellious spirit to overthrow the entire Zohar and the Kabbalah. So what you do is you compromise, and the compromise comes out nicely in two Sephardi rabbis we should be able to read before the end of the Shiur, and the major answer to all of this by Rabbi Dr. Yitzchak Isaac Levi Herzog. We'll have to leave until next time. We'll start with Me'ein Omer. Now, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was a prolific answerer of halachic questions. In fact, he was on the radio. Don't know whether anybody remembers this. But he used to come on a Friday afternoon, I think. And there was a halachic corner, and you could ask a question, and he would just run off 1,500 sources just like that, okay? Now, his secretary was somebody called Rabbi Yehuda Naki, okay? And he was a secretary for 22 years. He collected all of his tuvot. This thing runs into 14 or 15 volumes, this Mayan Omer. But let's have a look at the question. It's a very Sephardic issue. What do we know about Dardaim? But apparently it was an issue. So let's see, line 11. Legabei Dardaim. Regarding the Dardaim, Zacharuni, sheshalti et Moreinu v'Rabbeinu natrei rachmana v'yishmerehu. Okay. You can use whatever abbreviation you like. Thank you, Jean. Hagaon Rav Ovadia Yosef. Eineni zocher bebeirur im היה לגבי צירופו למניין או לקנות ספר תורה ומזוזות מסופר דרדאי. Can you buy Sefer Torah and Muzazot from a Yemenite who's a Dardai? Or can you join him to a minyan? Haim dino kekofer b'davar echad me'atorah shepasul. Because you can't buy tefillin and Muzazot or Sefer Torah, somebody who is a kofer, who's a heretic. Va'amani mori v'rabi natrei rakmana v'yinsarei, okay? Rav Ovadia Yosef, shekashe lomar ken, difficult to classify a Dardai as a kofer. Sharei Zohar haya ganuz shanim rabot. Rav Ovadia Yosef, same thing. The Zohar was hidden and concealed for many, many years. That's what we believe, okay? Now, the establishment. Everybody accepts the fact that the Zohar was simply not there, okay? So it was hidden, it was concealed. The Dardaim found a lot of problems with it. mares tira la ne'emar b'Torah. Now, if you're a Dardai, you'd say that as a Rambamist, things in the Zohar and the Kabbalah are actually totally against what's written in the Torah. And they are also Avodah Zarah. So, okay, we have a major problem. Lekach einam ma'aminim bo, that's why they don't believe in it. Ve'efshar ledunam kekofrim. But you cannot say that they are heretics. They believe in the Torah, the same Torah that all other traditional Orthodox Jews believe in. They just say a certain segment of Jewish learning is anti-Torah. אנחנו למעשה מה שמקבלים את הזוהר כחלק מתורה שבעל פה. Now he says something very interesting. The reason why today we Orthodox Jews, okay, accept the Zohar as part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. What do you learn in yeshiva or in kollel if you've been there for a long time? You learn Torah, Tanakh, Shas, Poskim, and Zohar. Musar perhaps a little bit. Who מכיוון שכל גדולי ישראל באותה תקופה ואחריה, all the great rabbis, or many of them, in the period after the Zohar had appeared, and especially after the Shulchan Aruch, קיבלו זאת כאמת ברורה. We accept the Zohar not because of what's in the Zohar, but because the great rabbis since the 16th century all seem to have accepted the Zohar as being an important book. And we're going to go into the question of what happens when the Zohar has a halakha that doesn't comport with the Talmud next time, okay? Again, all around the Zohar. But this is Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, certainly very frum, okay? And very much in the Sephardi world, Rishon Le Zion. Let's see what he has to say. Line 16. Lish Eilatcha. בינת ספר תורה שכתבו אדם שהוא מכת הדרדאים. ספר תורה written by a דרדאי שאינם מאמינים בקדושת הזוהר. Doesn't believe in the holiness of the Zohar. האם מותר לקרוא בספר תורה הזה? Are you allowed to use it? האם טעון שריפה? Or do you need to burn it? או לפחות טעון גניזה? Or hide it, bury it. ואסור לקרוא בו כעת. והנה הטעם של ספר תורה שכתבו מין ישרף, פירש רש"י in גיטין, שהמין ודאי לשם עבודת כוכבים כתבו. If a heathen or a pagan or I guess Christian writes a Sefer Torah, then it's written with an idolatrous aim in mind, and it is definitely burnable. וזה לפי פירושו שפירש שמין דהיינו האדוק בעקום כגון כומר, a pagan priest. אבל הרמב"ם הסביר, Rambam goes further. He says that a Sefer Torah, which is written by somebody who doesn't believe in the sanctity of the Torah, well, then the Sefer Torah is pasul because the names of God written in it have no holiness at all. Haradbaz dan binan Sefer Torah shektavo karai. Now, the Radbaz who lived where? Egypt. A lot of Karaites in Egypt, the 15th century, Rabbi David ben Zimra. He talked about a Sefer Torah that a Karai wrote, a Karaite, im kasher או לא. כי הרי הם מאמינים בתורה שבכתב, שהיא מהשמיים, מאמינים בקדושת השם, אלא טעון גניזה ואסור לברך עליו לקרות בו בציבור, מפני שאפשר שלא נעשה כתיקון חז"ל, כיוון שאינם מאמינים בדבריהם. Radbaz says the problem with the Karaite Sefer Torah, that since they only accept the written and not the oral law, they haven't written it halachically. But it's not because they do not believe in the right thing, and therefore it's the same as the Sefer Torah written by a min that is an idolatrous priest. And also, of course, Rabbi Eliyahu adds have a problem not believing in the Torah שבעל פה. אבל אם הוא אינו מאמין בדרשה אחת מדרשות חז"ל, שאינן מעכבות בכתיבת ספר תורה, מניין לנו שיש לפסול ספר תורה שכתבו. Why are we going to puzzle the Sefer Torah if you simply don't believe in these Agadot, these Drashot, this Zohar, this work of Kabbalah? That should not disqualify yourself, because in the essentials, you are a believer. Now, this is interesting historically. Then lavi hochacha lifsol mishut tshuva me ahava. And I don't bring me a proof from the shut of Who wrote Tshuva Me'ahava?
Elazar Flesculus.
Elazar Fleckless.
Right.
Wow, very good. And in which town was he the Rav?
In Prague,
Exactly. And who did he follow?
Yecheskel Lando, Rav Yecheskel Lando.
Absolutely. In fact, you can see his grave in the Zitchov cemetery in Prague, not the big one which has the Maharal and his wife and the Kliakar, but in the lesser known one. Hamurva bePitrei Tshuva. Now the Pitrei Tshuva cites him and in the Kol Yaakov, and Rabbo Anodab Yudah also supports his view. Sefer Torah shektavo Adam hamamin b'meshichuto shel Shatz Shari. Who is Shatz Shari?
Shem Reshaim Yirkav.
Now, Shari is Shem Reshaim Yirakev. May the name of the evil ones be blotted out. But what's the first bit? Shatz.
Shabtai Tzvi.
Shabtai Tzvi, the famous false messiah heretic Shabtai Tzvi. Okay, so if a Sefer Torah is written by somebody who believes in Shabtai Tzvi, pasul. כי הטעם מפורש שם שיש חשש שהוא לא כתב את השמות לשם קדושתן. There again, the names of God are not written with an idea of our God, the true God, if you like, the one and only, but שבתאי צבי, ופעמים אומרים זה אלוהים אלוהינו, כנודע שנפתחו תפילין של אחד מאל הרשעים, המאמינים בטמאי שבתאי צבי. שם רשעים ירקב, ומצאו בהן הקלף ציור דמות מצנפת. There's a crown on the clef, they put in פסוקים, ולמעלה מהמצנפת היה כתוב משיח שבתאי צבי. וזה שמו אשר יקראו השם צדקנו. Once you go that far, then of course you can't use the Sefer Torah or the Tefillin or the Muzuzah. אם כן, אין ספק שפגם כל השמות הקדושים במחשבת פיגול יחשב על הרשע העריץ הרע הזה. אם כן, נידון דידן, שאנשי כת זו מאמינים בתורה שבכתב ובתורה שבעל פה. דרדאים believe in תורה שבכתב ובתורה שבעל פה. רק אינם מאמינים בחלק של תורה שבעל פה. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, by the way, who is former, goes further than Rav Avad Yosef. As far as he's concerned, there's no question. Zohar is part of Torah Shebal Peh. But if you don't believe in that, you do not make the Sefer Torah pasul. Okay? V'yesh lehochicho, but of course you should reprove this sofer b'darchei noam in a nice way, u'lashon chachamim, and using the words of the wise, shelo Zohar derech, this is not the way. You're off the derech, my dear Dardai scribe. Va'alav lachzor bo lekabel alav divrei chaverut kadin, and you should rejoin mainstream orthodoxy and accept the Zohar for what it is, the holy work written or at least attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So that's a little about what we need to believe. The major piece will appear next week when we look at Rabbi Herzog's long tshuva, in which I think he sums the whole thing up very nicely indeed. So I'm going to stop the share screen. And in the last 1 minute or less, open up to questions or comments.
Yeah.
Anybody want to say anything? Joe?
I think that to end with Divrei Chavrut, that means Divrei Chavrut, this is in antagonism to the Karaim. To apply it to the Dardaim, it's a big exaggeration.
You are probably right, and that's why I suggested that we take Rav Ovadia a lot more seriously, because Rav Mordechai Eliyahu is very much in the mainstream Orthodox Sephardi mode today, okay? And for him, the Zohar is definitely Kadosh, okay? So you're entitled to say, I think, but you're quite right about the phrase, Divrei Chaverut. It implies that you're outside of the Torah Shebal Peh. Entirely, that's definitely not true of the Dardan, unless you say the Rambam, Mishneh Torah is outside the Torah Shebal Peh, which is clearly ludicrous. Okay, anyone else like to make a comment? in which case I will, as always, say, very good night, Erev Tov, bonsoir, guten Abend, and all the appropriate greetings, wishes for Besorot Tovot. And next week, same time, same place, same channel, we